and I'll talk about this technical stuff.
Yes.
We're live, right?
Yes, we are.
Oh, all right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Geopolitics in Conflict Show. As you saw the text, we ran to some technical issues here, so that's why we're not in the same studio. So I had to leave and reconnect from my own place, and that's how we're gonna do it today. So anyway, very excited to be with you guys as always. How are you, Elizabeth?
I am doing great, except for the technical
I
stuff, which
know.
has me so
I
frustrated. So
I was
frustrated.
there. I was
I
there, and
know.
I saw the frustration. So,
Ah,
yeah. Sorry, I couldn't help you because it's out of my realm. I'm not a
it's
tech
okay.
guy, so you know how it is. So, anyway, very excited to be with you guys. We got an interesting topic to talk to you about. I was aware of the topic because it happened when I was overseas. Of course, it was no way for me to do it live with Elizabeth from overseas. So we've decided, you know what? I'll wait till I get back home and we'll address this one. And this one has to do with the recent meeting in China that took place. When was it? The 11th, I believe, the 12th,
Yeah, it was
somewhere
very, very
around that.
recent. Yeah.
Somewhere around that. This is when it's known as the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation that just took place in Beijing, by which China sort of announced the investments of $50 billion in funding the African continent.
Yes.
Major one.
It's
Major
okay.
one, I would say.
So it's major, but I think the real key isn't necessarily
Yeah,
the investment, because China's been investing in Africa for kind of a while. But
that's
it's
true.
the reason behind the investment. What else is going on behind the scenes as China
Yeah,
is sort of maneuvering around on the global stage? Because, say what you want
yeah,
of China, but one of the biggest deals with China is that they're very, very strategic. And so I think our big takeaway for today, and what you and I are going to talk
yeah,
about, David, is
yeah.
what is the reason behind this big investment?
Yeah, that is true. Well, for me, the moment Africa comes into the conversation, I will automatically jump to this region here, right here, automatically,
Hmm.
because the Sahel region is the key to hold in. We're talking about Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Chad, Sudan, you name it. This is to me, especially now with what just took place recently with Niger, and we did a video on this one when they
Hmm.
reclaimed their two gold mines. Also, with the three countries, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali, now forming an alliance, because they dropped from the ECOWAS, the African Unity that was supposed to invade these countries. Remember during the
Hmm.
Niger issue, whatever. So to me
Yes.
personally, China's looking at those dynamics taking place and wanted to cement even its presence further or more than what it already had. I mean, like I always say, when you travel to Kenya, that airport you land on, who built it?
Right. Right.
So,
China. Absolutely.
so, but it makes you just wonder the timing of it, as you mentioned, and it behooves us to address certain key aspects from an economic perspective as to why China decided to go ahead with these investments of the $50 billion. No.
Well, let's hear a little bit from like let's take a look at some of the words that President Xi Jinping actually said when he was talking about this. So, we
Sure.
know the amount. So we know that it's 360 billion yuan. So it's about
Hmm.
51-ish billion dollars. It's a little bit less
Hmm.
than that. But let's see. Okay, with its future growth in mind, Xi said, I propose that bilateral relations between China and all African countries have diplomatic ties with China be elevated to the level of strategic relations. He
Very
added,
interesting.
yes, very, very interesting. He
Yeah.
added the overall characterization of China Africa relations should be elevated to an all weather China Africa community with a shared future for a new era.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
Well, it's very important because the keywords are very measured. Those are on two fronts, in my opinion, political and economic, of course. From an economic perspective, is the idea is that it's the global South. When I say
Mhm.
South, I'm referring to Africa, of course, part of that. The global South that is shifting now the global finance. I mean, you think about it, where the dollar is, where BRICS is headed forward with the finance aspect, where the BRI. I mean, when you think about the BRI, and I luckily that I kept some of the maps here. Always I
Mhm.
say will come handy. When you think about just something like this, just as an example, I know it's not in Africa, but you think about the Chinese BRI and its role in Africa, you can just see why China is wanted to think strategically, like you mentioned earlier. You know,
Mhm.
the second aspect has to do with China itself. What China's economy, there are those who are saying that is stagnant as we speak because of the changes that's happened after the for the last 4 or 5 years after COVID. That's just normal reaction to that. But also it is also the changes on the global stage, given the amount of
Mhm.
tensions that exist between, for example, Ukraine and Russia, which impacting the energy market in Europe, and Europe is paying the price. But China also looking at it differently. China
Yeah.
also has to think in terms of what if scenario. And
So
that's to me the way I see it.
yeah, and so okay, so that's absolutely the point, right?
Yeah.
When we talk, because there's later in what President Xi Jinping says, where he
Hmm.
says, oh, this is win-win, good for everybody. And
Hmm.
although I definitely think that's the case, there are a couple of really key things that Africa has. The first is Africa has a growing population.
Hmm.
So let me make sure that I get these numbers completely accurate, but it looks like so Africa is one of the only growing nations population wise in the world.
Hmm.
So right now,
Hmm.
fundamentally, we have a lot of reducing of population, especially in the Western world. The only reason that some of the Western world countries are staying at equilibrium is because of immigration, for example. But the Western
Hmm.
world is declining in population. And China is also declining in population because of the one child policy. So the one child
Hmm.
policy was meant to decrease the population, but then it did decrease the population. And so
Which is
that is
yeah.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that is a serious problem.
It is because you have a very large aging population, and then you have a much smaller population underneath it
Yeah.
that is sort of the bulkhead of the next generation that's coming up. And so there are
Yeah.
a bunch of problems with that when you have such a large gap in population. I'm not 100% sure what they were thinking at the time. I mean, I was very, very young, but I remember
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember that there were a lot of concerns at the time about it. But
Yeah.
it's not just China. The Western world has that problem as a whole. So the United States has that problem. All Europe has that problem all over the place. But Africa is not. Africa is growing in size. Let me see if I can pull the numbers. But I think it's like
Yeah.
1.7 billion people by 20. There it is. Africa is expected to reach 1.7 billion by 2030, an
Mm.
increase of around 400 million from
Wow.
today.
Yeah.
So China is rapidly increasing in population. China also has a very, I'm sorry,
You mean
Africa.
Africa?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, you guys. What I'm talking
That's
about.
all right. Yeah.
Technology got me all frazzled. But Africa has also a very cheap labor force, which
Yeah.
China has less and less of right now. You cannot get the same because China's economy has risen hundreds of millions of people out of abject poverty, and
Yeah.
those are the people that they used to use as very cheap labor. Now they
Yeah.
don't have that. So where is the next place that cheap labor is going to come from? And I will say this, there is, and I'll pull up this graph
Hmm.
if I can find it. but this is a quote from Yardeni. Chinese companies need buyers for their products. So we're talking about right now the fact that China is having a little bit of trouble finding buyers for their products because domestically here in the United States, we're trying to, we're trying to lower the amount that we get from China. We've increased how much we get from Mexico, which that's a funny statement because where does Mexico get their stuff from?
From
China. So, there's definitely more complexity to this.
Yeah.
But right now, China's struggling a little bit to find who to sell their goods to, right? So this is the balance that both China and the United States are sort of facing. So this is Yardeni says this. Chinese companies need buyers for their products. With demand low at home, they're looking abroad for buyers and cutting prices. Foreign governments, worried about the health of their domestic industries, which they should be, aren't happy about this development. The US and Europe are threatening to institute new tariffs to prevent low-priced Chinese goods from flooding into their market, which we absolutely are seeing right now.
Yeah. Well, even for us here in the U.S., the candidate Trump already announced he will impose tariffs on the Chinese. Remember, he started the first one back in 2018.
Right.
So that's just. But also, to me, that's where China is thinking strategically, thinking ahead, because it's inevitable that the U.S. will impose the tariffs. You look at the Europeans did regarding the BYD, the electric vehicles. Even Turkey has had to embark on that. Italy, I mean, you get the idea. And to China had to think in terms of, okay, is there another market out there that at least where we can sell our product? Africa is big. Africa is now small, but also because of the manpower that exists in Africa, the labor force that is. So the markets, of course, there is much needed infrastructure for Africa, but strategically, you can just see why the Chinese moving forward. The Russians are doing the same. We are doing the same, except that for us, we only like only a handful of countries in Africa that we still can manage control over. I'll give you a quick example just for you guys to know. One country, and I believe I'm going to do some video talk about it, has to do with Kenya, But when you look at other countries like Niger, when Niger officially, 3 days ago, on the 16th, officially ended U.S. military presence in Niger. Officially. In other words, they've been out completely. So to Niger, as an example, Niger is going to have to be looking for other major powers to fill the void, because there is a lot of, usually when we come in with money, loans and all that stuff. But even you look at some African countries right now are rejecting the IMF loans. So China, of course, come in with this. China's not doing it for free either. But where the difference is that the investments, I read up some details about it, and how China is going to manage this kind of loans for the $50 billion. There's already an indication that half of this loan will be in form of credit. Okay. Nearly about $11 billion will be given to various types of grants. And also another $10 billion will be used for investments through Chinese firms. So this is how President Xi breaks it down. Now, where I see the difference between this and IMF is that those loans can be worked out with the borrowers. So, and as a matter of fact, it is to my knowledge that China has renegotiated some previous debt with African nations. The Russians went ahead and forgave about $20 billion in loans. IMF can't do this. This is why IMF is changing now its approach to lending. I just found out yesterday that even Pakistan, I think, they are not Pakistan. It was another country in Africa. I'm sorry, I forgot the name for now. And they said no thanks, but no thanks to IMF.
Well, they have watched over the last decade after decade what IMF loans have done to the countries
That's
that have
true.
taken them. I mean, look at Central and South America. I mean, look at the
Yeah,
loans that are still being paid back from what, the 80s. And
that's true.
these, I mean, look at Sri Lanka. It's, you know, countries, if there is an alternative to the IMF, they're taking it. And it's
Yeah,
very interesting because one of the things, so, and this is, you know, as you guys know, I have mixed feelings about China. There's some positives and there's some
yeah,
negatives, certainly.
yeah,
But what I will say about Africa is that when the colonial countries went into Africa, they took everything from
yeah,
Africa. They didn't really give very much back. And so a lot of what's happened to Africa over the last, honestly, couple hundred years
yeah,
has been as a result of people taking from Africa and not really giving anything in return, right? They took
yeah,
the wealth, the people, they took everything out of Africa and didn't really build it. In the past 22 years, China has built 100,000 kilometers of highways, which is 62,000 miles of
miles.
highways in Africa,
Yeah,
and 10,000 kilometers of railways in Africa. So there's a very there's Africa's very mineral rich, right? I think that's a very well-known thing, that
yeah,
Africa's very mineral rich. It's what the colonizers more or less wanted out of Africa.
yeah,
Um, but it does seem that China is making a genuine effort to also include Africa in the decision making. So the AU, the
yeah,
United African Countries, in a lot of decision making. So one of the things that I did think was interesting is that China and now also India are rooting for the African Union to be part of G20.
wow,
Isn't that interesting?
yeah.
So go ahead.
And I was going to say, I even saw a call for Africa to have a veto power at the UN.
Yeah.
So makes you just wonder. So,
Well, if we look at population alone,
yeah,
if we look at resource alone, so it's interesting to watch because, you know, when I was growing up and before I was growing up, before I was here, you know, China
yeah,
was the next place where you could send your manufacturing and
hmm,
manufacture cheaply. And
yeah,
it's always somewhere. If you look throughout history, the country that is the on top, right, the empire country, always has another country that they outsource their manufacturing to.
factoring too. Yeah,
I don't
that's
know
true.
how long it'll take humanity to learn that lesson, but there's
Yeah,
always a country that it outsources manufacturing to because it's cheaper. And
yeah,
so we've seen that throughout history. Okay, well, so now China is facing a lot of the same problems that the United States was, as they have a growing middle class. As they have a growing middle class, they have less people to make these things cheaply. And so
yeah,
that means, and okay, so the whole China good buying and tariff, I want to talk about that for a second,
yeah.
because we just had an interview with Leor Gantz, who is one of our guests. And David did it because technology, and I couldn't get on.
Yeah,
But he was talking about tariffs being a positive, on which I have mixed feelings about. But he was talking about tariffs being a positive on goods coming from China. The problem with that is that the US buyer is so stretched right now because of
yeah,
corporate greed that
yeah.
I don't think that's actually a good thing.
Well, that's why I asked him the question in the sense of, I said, I'm perplexed as to
Mm.
if we are to consider tariffs are a good thing, how is that going to translate to average? I'm talking about average people.
Which
This
is
is why
like
I
all
didn't.
of us.
Yeah, this is why I didn't understand when candidate Trump saying, "Well, as soon as I take office, I'm gonna impose tariffs on Chinese." That's gonna translate to the average citizen. You know, the elites here in the U.S. they don't deal with
I don't
this
care.
kind of stuff. They live in a
Okay.
bubble, some other universe per se. The average person that has already been struggling, and it's only getting even worse when you think in terms of, well, you add more tariffs into those prices, that those the prices of those items that are coming from China
Right.
is going to jump to the roof. I mean,
Right.
I give the example of Nike. And I don't buy Nike, and I have nothing against Nike. When Nike, you produce the shoe for 20, for about
I mean,
$2 or so. Okay.
child labor in the
Yeah,
past, but
yeah.
other than that,
And we think just about it in terms of, here it is, $20 to make a shoe, assuming. And how much do you pay those laborers over there? $1 a day.
yeah,
Okay, that's one. Then you add the freight, then you add the cost of insurance, then you add everything. You bring the shoe over here. How much do you charge for that so you can pay the
right.
athletes? That's ridiculous. That's why I have never bought a Nike. Yes, my son did ask about Nike, whatever. It's like, hey man, I'll give you some money and you buy it yourself. I ain't gonna buy that. It's just something I don't believe in that. But at the same time, I think in terms of the average, when a shoe start to cost $250 to $300, I personally have an issue with purchasing a shoe at that price.
Yeah.
Simple as that. So, and this is where I believe the idea of imposing these tariffs on the Chinese. With the Chinese, we will always need the Chinese market. Of course, the Chinese need the U.S. market also, where to sell the product.
Yeah. If without the US, where are they going to
Exactly.
sell their
But
stuff?
but here's the thing, like you mentioned earlier, there are now some other locations. I can think of two right away at the top of my head: Vietnam and Cambodia. Becoming liberal. So I am already hearing a conversation here in the US that they're trying to shift some of the chain production to those two locations. Now, those two locations do have the infrastructure needed as they do in China? Not necessarily. That was the same arguments when you heard recently about Apple moving its operations from India back to China. Makes you just wonder, because the sheer size of the Chinese market can't be ignored. And this is where I see the big picture of the China's investments in Africa. They're thinking long term. This is not for tomorrow or the next day.
Well, and speaking directly to that, David, apparently
Yeah.
electric vehicle sales have risen by 291% in 2023. So last year they rose 291% demand for electric vehicles. So I mean, granted, it was not exactly a huge demand before, so the increase is substantial.
Yeah.
But the
Yeah.
wealthier Africa becomes, the more it will be able to buy Chinese goods. So in a sense, China is also sort of building up its own customer base
Yeah.
as sort of
And
an alternative.
that's part of any business model. I mean, you think about it. You think about it just for us here in the channel. So we do have our avid supporters that they've been with us forever. So you
Yes.
kind of
Thank you.
have to attend to those to the supporters for example, the topics they would like us to address and so forth. In other words, their interest is of importance to us.
Yeah.
And the same thing, you take it to the business model. So if you have a customer base, you're going to have to attend well to that consumer base. That's just the name of the business. And to go back to your point about the EVs, you look at what the Europeans are doing now. All of them are thinking in terms of how we can cut a deal with the Chinese unilaterally. Did you hear about Germany going to China on behalf of the EU? Did you hear about the French going to China on behalf of the EU? The Italians, you get the idea. To the point that I even found out that even Polish president, he is advocating now for aligning with China. Why do you think that is? It's because he's seeing the changes that's taking place in Eastern Europe, especially with two countries, Serbia and Hungary. Why is that? Because China's going to build factories for EV batteries in those two countries, and how that's going to translate into employments and so forth. So it's just common sense to me, with China investing in this way. It's thinking long term, because the geopolitical change is coming, is already in Africa, whether we like it or not. That's fait accompli. It's a done deal. It becomes just now, once the dust settles. And as you may, I don't know if you're aware of the current President Biden's upcoming trip to Angola. Makes you just wonder, why the heck the guy is going to Angola? He can't even walk straight. No offense to an elderly. Why are you going to Africa for? Because to Angola for? You wasting taxpayers' money. And what is the purpose of it? Well, only if to realize the importance of Angola within the big picture, especially when it comes down to energy. A lot of people do not know that Angola is the second largest oil producers in the Sahel region.
Yep.
Yeah. So
Yep.
of course, they left OPEC in 2024, January 2024, and
Mhm.
this is why you start to think in terms of what is the geopolitical angle here, and of course there is the economic angle into that. So, and all this, if you look at the Sahel region, I'm going to bring back that map. If you look at just the locations here, just take a look and see geographically and how that can translate into geopolitics. I'm going to start with this country right here at the top right, Egypt. You know, what did Egypt is a member of right now? Can you guys type in the chat box?
Oh yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
huge.
Let me
Yeah,
see.
yeah,
Yeah, let me see, guys. If you can type in the chat box, what is Egypt belong to right now as a group, as a member too?
Mhm.
Let me see if you guys can type in that.
Which is very interesting
Yeah.
considering the geopolitics of that entire region.
Uh-huh.
We're not going to get into what's going on in that region, but
Of
yeah,
course.
Karakulak.
Yeah. Yeah.
Got it.
Karakolak.
Yes.
Karakolak. Karakolak. You're absolutely correct.
Mhm.
Nezi, you're absolutely correct.
Yep.
My point. When you think about it from a geopolitical, you can see also the economic angle. Then you think about this area right here. We're talking about Sudan, Eritrea area. Why is that important? Why the Russians are interested in that? So is the Chinese. Is access to the Red Sea and Indian Ocean, because
Mhm.
the waterways is always important. You think
Yeah.
also about the Sahel regions, the Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, with the massive amount of minerals, the rare earth, the gold, you name it. You can just see why. Even up north, if you go up north to Algeria, for example, you
Mhm.
know, Algeria is an OPEC member, so, and the location strategic access to the Mediterranean. This is why Italy had to reconsider its decision, because it was pressured by the US to move out of the BRI. So my point in all this, guys, is just for you to understand that while China doing this, of course, they had to think about the strategic importance of it.
Mhm.
That's what's at the heart of all this one. So, and if you go all the way south in South Africa, in yeah, the South Africa area and all that stuff, you see the regions also has developed with certain investments from the Chinese, because in an anticipation of that geopolitical change that is already upon us here, as the world shifts from, or has already shifted from a unipolar to a multipolar.
So you want to hear an interesting thing? I mean, obviously, you know this,
Sure.
but an interesting thing that I found as I was going through the information
Mm-hmm.
about this investment. And
Mm-hmm.
that is that the grants and loans are in yuan. They're not in
Interesting.
US dollars.
Yeah.
And, you know, the renminbi only is 6% of all currency transactions. Okay. It's not a lot. It's the
Mm-hmm.
same with the euros, like 5%, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's very, very interesting that not only are they giving these grants and loans, but they're giving them in the yuan. And that to me is a very interesting solidification,
Mm-hmm.
or attempted solidification of the yuan, as more and more trades begin to occur in the yuan.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think that's interesting, and I think no matter what, the yuan is is actually a very worthwhile currency because people, so like the big problem with India, right, and
Yeah.
paying in rupees is that not a ton comes out of India. I mean, obviously some very good quality things come out of India, but on a large scale,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
less goods and services that people want to buy from India.
Yeah.
People want to buy a lot from China. China makes a lot of what we have. And
Yeah.
so in a sense, it actually makes sense to have to have yuan, to do transactions in the yuan, because of how much China actually has that people want to buy.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I thought that was a very interesting part of it. And I mean, the renminbi is literally, I think it's like 6% of all global transactions. So it's
Yeah.
not a lot.
Yeah.
But I do see that number creeping up and up and up and up. And that's very interesting.
Yeah. I had a chance to read an article by Richard Turin. You all know
Mhm.
Richard Turin, right? He's a friend of the show here, and as a friend, I consider Rick a friend. So it was interesting that he mentioned that the idea of the de-dollarization, it's a fait accompli. It's a
Mhm.
done deal. No matter what we hear, because you hear the other voices saying, "Oh, that's nothing but hypes. It's nothing but hypes." Now, and his argument,
Yeah.
he's someone I trust. Rick has been around long enough to know. And the idea they mentioned that, which goes exactly with what you are mentioning about interesting how the loans were in the Chinese yuan,
Yeah.
the dollar. And that's where that trend is headed, with more countries and more are moving into that direction. This is why
Mhm.
you look at what candidate Trump has threatened to punish countries if they don't use the US dollar. And that's, to me, is kind of like, well, hold on a second, man. You
Yeah.
know, who are you to punish me if they don't want to use the dollar? Is that their prerogative? It's like, for you, you want to buy item A, but you don't want to buy item B. You shouldn't be forced into buying item B because you choose not to. So, and I don't
Well,
know how far this is going to go, whether we will succeed into or creating more problems.
Well, ultimately, there's the two ways to get someone to do something. There's the carrot
Yeah,
and the stick, right? This is like the
yeah,
donkey, right? You get the carrot, you get the donkey to move either with giving it something that it wants, the
uh-huh,
carrot,
uh-huh,
or with threat of punishment, the stick. And I think fundamentally one of the biggest issues that the United States has created globally is, and not just the US, the colonizing countries before did the same thing. I mean,
yeah.
the British Empire before, the Dutch Empire, the French Empire, there are very well known for using the stick, for using punishment.
That's
The
true.
problem with that is that you create enemies. And when those enemies gain power, they
Yeah,
overtake you.
yeah,
So I think fundamentally, anybody talking about using punishment and specifically financial policy punishment, we have
yeah,
gotten to where we are right now, which is not a very good place, by using financial punishment, by using sanctions, for example, by imposing very high tariffs. And I will say this. I ultimately, so Chinese electric vehicles and Chinese vehicles in general, they tend to be high quality.
yeah,
We see videos, every week of like a Tesla like exploding on the highway or stopping or something, right? We see that all the time. And nothing against Teslas. I mean,
yeah, yeah.
interesting innovation for sure. But Chinese vehicle, I mean, you're not going to say like, Tesla has no problems. That's unrealistic.
Of course.
Um, but you have these Chinese electric vehicles, for example, that come in, and right now I think the average car price is somewhere around $40,000, right? So if somebody is, for example, getting a new car at 16, or a young person who's just come out of college, and needs a reliable car, because used cars are not always reliable, and on and on and on, right? But let's say
Yeah,
you need to buy a new car for some reason. The price of vehicles has gone up so substantially that now, instead of 5-year car notes, there are 7-year car notes, because it's too expensive for the everyday person to pay $1,000 US a month for a car payment. The incomes have not increased to the extent where that's viable. So if Chinese vehicles came in and flooded the US markets, the car companies that have been in the news recently, in the last year, for renegotiations with their unions, because they've been posting record profits, and then their employees are not seeing the benefits of that, right? It's
yeah,
record profits off the work of their backs. And
yeah,
so if Chinese vehicles came in and flooded the US market, the car companies would have to completely change their business models, because people would buy on price alone.
yeah,
And so right now, I understand wanting to protect American business, right? But it's at the cost of what exactly? Because right now, and it's not all companies, a lot of companies are going bankrupt because
Yeah.
they cannot, because the American buyer is so stretched thin, because everything has gotten stupid expensive. And so I don't for one second believe that whatever tariff is put on Chinese vehicles, on whatever, is going to be paid by those companies, by the Chinese companies. They're going to be paid by the consumer, and
So
that's on purpose. And I understand that technically, and I understand Trump's point that technically it's supposed to protect American business. But American business right now, I am not sure is worthy of protection, because they
yeah.
are absolutely raking the American people over the coals.
Yeah.
And it would improve quality of life here in the United States to have cheaper vehicles that are high quality. It would improve quality of life here. And so I don't know. I have an issue with the argument of it will protect American businesses. Of course, I want to protect American businesses, but I want to protect American people from American businesses
Yeah.
also.
Also, you think about the government's role that is very, very sort of incompetent in the sense of not
Oh
able to
my God.
provide for the. I
Yeah.
mean, to me, it becomes very problematic when you start to
Mhm.
criticize the government. All of a sudden, you are being labeled as anti this, anti that, which is nonsense. Because to me, that's what the role of a productive citizen is. When you
Yeah.
point out, "Hey, government, get your act together." It's because
Yeah.
it's
I'm
in.
pro US. I'm
Yeah,
pro
yeah,
US because I want things to be better here. I
yeah,
don't
and
want to go and have a panic attack every time I'm about to check out at the grocery store, right?
yeah, and
I'm
that's the whole idea
tired of
of,
that.
well, because it start to it begs the question, what happened to our tax dollars? What are we paying taxes for?
We
To
know
me, it's
that,
like
David.
well, it's kind of, I've been struggling with this. I have,
Yeah.
at some point in my career, I had no problem paying taxes. And my tax bill, you'll be surprised if I tell you that was over $42,000, just my tax bill. Yeah, when you make a good money, whatever, I have no problem. You gotta help
Mhm.
someone. But when you start seeing that the government is just wasting money, I got an issue with that.
Yeah.
Why am I seeing that the money just wasted? And I don't believe in even on a family level.
Mhm.
I don't just waste the dollar because you have extra. What? No, it doesn't
Yeah.
work that way. You got to put it into good use that either you, your family, or whomever, another human being can benefit from. Well, for us, the government ain't doing that. And this is where
Mhm.
you think of that big picture, thinking of that big picture when, for example, candidate Trump announced about the tariffs. Okay, that's all good, but do you understand the impact it's going to have on average Joe, average Jane? That's to me
Yeah.
was the so.
Well, I'm
There
not
is
sure they
another,
care. I'm not
yeah.
sure they care,
What they
David.
don't
I don't
care.
think they care.
They don't.
I
It's
don't
the
care
truth.
which party tells you they care. I can
Oh,
see
two
what the
faces,
country looks
two,
like.
two faces of the same coin.
Yeah.
That's a given. There is another point we need to mention within the perspective of what is that picture? I'm going to bring it back. That map, even though maybe the country is right here. Let me show if it is here. Yes, it is. Which country I'm looking at? I am looking at Turkey. Why is that important? It's for you guys to understand within the context of what China is doing. So here's the map again. I'll show it. And Turkey right here. Why is this important? Is because Turkey just announced he wants to join BRICS. But what you
Mhm.
also need to know, what Turkey is doing in Africa, especially when it comes down to Sudan. Why? It's because access to the water. So those are
Yeah.
the dynamics that you need to understand. There is always a much bigger picture. Like I always say, nothing happens in a vacuum when it comes down to geopolitics.
Right.
So this is where the thinking it's going when it comes down to China thinking in those terms, because that change into the geopolitical landscape, it's happening, and it will happen even further and faster as we move forward. And China wants to be pre-possession
Mhm.
to deal with those kind of changes, because if you think about, for example, I'm going to take you to this part of the world, Malacca Strait. You think
Mm.
about the waterways and how much transits of goods that
Oh
so to
yeah.
China, Yeah, to China, it is always the importance of understanding, you know, how we are ensuring the security of those maritime. So when you think about the Indo-Pacific, the same arguments can be made, and
Mhm.
same thing applies to when you think about Africa.
Yeah.
That's the way I see it. So the strategic thinking of a part of where Africa is moving forward with the. Do you know there is now a conversation about the U.S. thinking about building, establishing, not building, a base in the North Somalia?
That's
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. Well, you look at where Somalia is. You look at you guys looking at it at the map right there. What is the
Mhm.
access to? You got the Arabian Sea, you got the Indian Ocean, and you got
Yep.
the Red Sea. So, what are we going to Somalia to establish our base there and so forth? Because you got still certain countries in Africa, like Kenya, you know, and that we are in control of Nairobi, no matter what they say, you know.
Mhm.
The president of Kenya is in a pocket. So that's, and I know this for a fact because even in my days when I used to travel to that part of the world, is kind of, you know, you kind of know the dynamics where they are. So the Chinese are thinking in terms of, okay, with the changes in the economy domestically at home in China, they also have to think in terms of, okay, well, where are we gonna send and sell our products?
Right.
And it's right, right. Any business owner will be thinking in these terms. That's to me the
Right.
common sense.
Right. And so fundamentally, I think this choice from China
Yeah,
is for the next 10 years, for the next 20 years, for the next 30 years. As the balances of power change,
yeah,
Africa, you cannot ignore that Africa's population is growing. You cannot ignore that the Western population is shrinking. You
yeah,
cannot ignore that wealth never stays stagnant. It never stays with one country, right?
yeah.
It's always move. It's so I did a show on the different types of power,
Hmm.
and power by nature is transient. It moves to different people, different cultures, different countries at different times.
Yeah,
And one of the things that I think that all empires that end have in common is that they don't pay attention to that trend. They somehow think that it's going to be this way forever. And then they don't plan ahead
yeah,
for what the next the where the power is going next. And so I will say that I'm impressed, I guess, in a sense, with China, that they are looking at where the power is next.
yeah.
And
Well,
Africa is one of those places.
and that was a reflection through the attendance. Do you know how many attended? To my knowledge, based on what I read, was about 53
Mhm.
representatives. You know,
Yeah, I think that
and
one was missing, but that was it.
was it?
Yeah, but it was almost everybody. It was almost everybody.
Yeah, and what I found very interesting, because I was aware of this as I was overseas, as I mentioned earlier, I just couldn't
Mhm.
do a lot of the live streams from there, whatever. So, what was interesting is that the Chinese government decided to allocate time for each
Mhm.
member. So, unlike what we do here in the U.S., what do? We get them
Joe
all
Biden
together
falls
in a room
asleep.
and show up for 5 minutes, say hi, everybody, which
Yeah.
is sort of this is a this personal touches you can
Mhm.
add into human relations.
Yeah.
When you allocate some time to meet with someone face to face and allocate time and chat, it's better than when you go about, oh, get everybody in a room and just do about 2 minute talking. And that's exactly what the US administration always does. So the Chinese approached it differently, knowing that this will have an impact.
Mhm.
It will have an impact because
Yeah.
it's part of the culture. That's how it's always been in China. Culturally speaking, it was always that human aspects of it.
Yeah.
It's always been. So that's, to my
Well,
knowledge, based on what I read, it's been throughout its history. The leaders have always come
mm,
down to the level of average person and deal with that face to face. So And
Well,
that's usually stuff like that adds a little bit more
yeah.
touch and credibility on the leader, whomever that might be.
You
So
know,
this is where I see personal changes coming up with this particular aspects of the Chinese investments, and of course the 10 areas that they're going to be investing on regarding uh, 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 the Chinese ventures in Africa, that both will embark on both diversity, will
yeah.
embark on inclusiveness, will embark on that approach to win-win situation for both. Africa is going to benefit, so is China. Simple as that.
Well, and I don't know whether, I don't know whether that's going to be true or not
I
over the
can
next
hear you.
decade. Oh, you can't hear me? Can
No,
you guys hear
I
me?
can hear you.
Can you guys hear
Here we
me?
go.
Can you
Yes,
hear
yes, I
me?
can hear you now.
Okay. Can you
Yeah,
guys
I
hear
can.
me?
Yeah,
Okay. Um, so what was I saying? Oh, I think fundamentally I don't know whether they're going to hold up to that bargain or not. You know what I mean? People say all kinds of nice flowery things, but then when it comes down to it, that's when you can really tell who someone is. So I don't know. But what I can say is that even approaching it
well,
with
hold
the
on, hold on, hold on. What do you mean?
of that.
Hold on. What do you mean by not holding up to the end of the bargain? Which one?
Well, so President Xi Jinping is in power right now, right? But
Uh huh. Uh huh.
he's getting older. That's a fact.
Uh
He's
huh.
getting older.
Uh huh.
So,
He's 71.
it's
Yeah.
right. At some point,
Uh
he
huh.
won't be anymore. I don't know at what point that will be, but at some point he won't be anymore.
Yeah.
And uh even if he lives a long, long, healthy life, it's still, there's still an end to that.
Yeah,
And
but it will be. But it will be a strategy. I mean, I'm sure they're already thinking of for the next 5, 10. They go like that. They're not. They're.
right. But what
You
I'm
know.
saying is that as things progress,
Yeah.
you don't always have control over how they go over time. I mean,
I see what you mean. Yeah.
you even look at the U.S. government. It had, JFK, God rest his soul, but JFK had a lot of really great ideas
Yeah.
that, and I actually think it's interesting. So I had this conversation. This is a side note, but it's kind of an important side note. So I had this
Yeah.
conversation amongst friends recently, my husband and I, about at what point did I think it was after I watched the debate. Oh my
Oh, you
god.
watched it. Oh, why? Why waste your time?
My husband
What?
is very into politics, so he
Yeah.
I couldn't
Oh,
I
okay.
couldn't help it. I couldn't help it. It was a pizza and politics night. It was
Oh, I see.
terrible. It was so bad. It was so bad. But after watching it, it
Yeah.
American politics has become a tit for tat, this trying to stop all the bad things, right? Or like talking
Yeah.
about trying to stop all the bad things and not really doing much about doing that. But
Yeah.
American politics is focused on how bad everything is, right? And one
Hmm.
side is blaming the other for how bad it is. That debate was, in my personal opinion, horrible on both sides. But
Yeah.
one of the things that kept happening was Kamala Harris was like, "Oh, well, it's he did this," and Donald Trump was like, "She did this," and so it was like a back and forth of like how bad things are.
Yeah.
And I was not alive for the time when the United States was optimistic by nature and optimistic politically. But I do remember, I can see throughout history that there was a time when the United States politics was about what we could build. Could we?
Yeah.
And I know it's a space race with the Russians and all of that, but it was a time of hope for what the country could build and what the country could become. And
Yeah.
at some point that shifted. The political conversation in the United States shifted from what can we become to here are all the bad and terrible things, and let's just talk about them for a couple decades and not do anything. And
Yeah.
like scream back and forth about how bad this thing is or how bad this thing is. It's more or less the same topics on repeat over and over and over again for decades. And so
Yeah.
I think, and like I said, I don't know what the trajectory of China will be in the next 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 years. I don't know. Perhaps more educated and wiser people in that regard than me can say that. But I do hope that this air of wanting to build Africa up
Mhm.
continues from China. Because that, I think, if that is the fundamental philosophy that China works with in its
Yeah,
foreign relations,
yeah,
if that's the case,
yeah,
then I think that actually is what should be brought on the global stage on a larger level, is that philosophy fundamentally of how do we build each other up and create scenarios where we both win
yeah.
instead of
But
one
yeah, but
winning.
that philosophy is only sort of unique to the Chinese, because that's a reflection of their own culture. I can tell you now, right now, that the plan has already been there for a while, for
Mhm,
even up to 2049,
mhm,
because 2049 marks a major milestone in Chinese history. They already thought about that. They already planned it. And you know what's surprising? As one who's been watching China from early 2000s,
mhm.
even back then, I argued, you guys need to understand where China's headed. And everybody was looking at me like I'm speaking some foreign language. So you don't see what's going,
Mhm.
what's coming, right? Do you? Is it, what do you mean? As like it became clear to me, because there was the thinking from the Chinese perspective that way down the road, and the difference is between them and us. Of course, we do have two different systems and so forth, but the thing
Sure.
is, this set the goal and achieved it, work
Mhm.
towards it. You know, Tell me, when was the last time we did that here? And I'm not, I'm criticizing my country, but also because it's due to be criticized.
Well,
Simple
and
as
the
that.
thing, that's what I'm trying to say is there it used to be that way in the United States. We used to I mean, like I said, I was not around for this, but my understanding is that it actually used to be that way. Is that here in the United States, we used to have goals. We used to have things that we wanted to create, not just here in the United States, but on the global stage. I know that the United States at one point thought that it was going to be the beacon of technology, and in a sense, that's true. But all of our technology is turns out is not that great for us. Turns out,
Yeah,
social media is actually really bad for your mental health. And
yeah,
our technology has taken us away from ourselves instead of allowing us to become more of ourselves.
yeah,
And so the United States did used to be that way. My dad's era, that prevailing sense of like hope and wanting to be better was there.
yeah.
And then I don't know what change happened. It's something I'm heavily looking into, but
Yeah.
I don't know what change happened, but apparently at some point that changed. And
Well,
now.
yeah, yeah. Well, the reason I'm smiling when you mentioned about we were good in technology,
Mhm.
it's not something to smile about, but I'm just thought of it about what just happened with the pagers in Lebanon.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
all now the Western, makes you just wonder about what was the fuss about Huawei back then. You know what I mean? Because that's when you start to think in terms of, are you gonna be even trusting more Western devices and so forth? We all know how things are, but the bottom line to all this is that the strategic thinking for the Chinese investments is not some sort of in a controlling manner, or
Mhm.
behind the thinking that's what's behind it. No, no, I can tell you this. This is different than what the IMF does. This is different than what World
God, I
Bank
hope
does.
so.
Yeah, but of course the Chinese will have to. They're not gonna just give money free like this. Yeah, they can help, but to a degree. And like I mentioned to you earlier, I did mention it one time. I was aware of a particular case in Morocco, in Tangier, when the Chinese offered the Moroccan government that we will upgrade your city of Tangier. And to those who've been in Tangier, it's a wonderful city, right access to the Mediterranean from Gibraltar, and you can access Spain and so forth. And they were gonna do some very, when Chinese gets involved in
Mhm.
ventures, they will put that city at the top. But the Moroccan government said no,
Mhm.
and they said, no, it's because the Chinese wasn't going to do it for you. That's one. And second, we're not going to do this free for you. Of course. But I bet you Moroccan government said no because they were pressured to do so. But and what did the Chinese do? They just shook the hands of the Moroccan government and said thank you.
Mhm.
Life goes on. So
Yeah.
it was till recently that the Moroccan government reached out to China now for some cultural exchange to
Cultural
pick up the ball.
exchange, huh?
Yeah. And you know why? You know
Mhm.
why? It's because Algeria got a deal with the Chinese.
Mm.
So Egypt got a deal with the Chinese.
Yeah.
Tunisia got a
Yeah.
deal with the Chinese. So that's my point. It's in terms of the Chinese investments. Of
Mhm.
course, it's a long-term strategy. That's normal. It's a win-win for both. Africa's going to benefit because Africa's history is a testimony to this. Go back for the last 100 years and tell me if it was any imperial country that have really worked for the benefit of African countries.
Yeah.
African nation people are still living in poverty. Why? Despite the massive amount of wealth they have under their under the ground for oil, natural resources, gold, you name it.
Well,
Where
not only that, David, but I think the US gives Africa something like 8 billion in aid every year too.
yeah, yeah,
So
and
it's not just mineral resources.
that's
They're
true.
getting money. Their
That's true.
governments are getting money.
Yeah, and this is when I argued this a year ago. A year ago, I remember there is a video there, video out there for the record. I argued. I said, "Mark my word, you're gonna be seeing a lot of U.S. officials flying into Africa." It's because
Mhm.
the trend to me was clear back then. Even one time I did a video with Ross way back, titled "Africa: The New Geopolitical Ring," where
Mhm.
major powers gonna, and here
Yeah.
we are. So, and that was just it became clear to me where things are going, and this is why we wanted to talk about this topic, even though I know it happened. But again, because I was overseas, I couldn't do it from overseas, and we wanted to address this one here, and it becomes now the question as to Africa is part of that global south. That makes me just wonder, what will India be thinking? Because I believe India could turn around its fortune, but
Mhm.
it chooses not to. India will be far better economically speaking if it's aligned with China. But again,
Well,
India's being pressured.
it didn't India sort of like flip-flop, and India the whole one earth, one family, one future, tagline. Where isn't India also pushing for the African Union's inclusion in G20, like the
Well,
permanent one?
yeah, it does. It will do because, of course, remember, this is not out of the goodness because India also is concerned about
Sure.
now that there are more countries into BRICS, India's
Mhm.
losing influence.
Yeah,
It's just the way it is. I
that's a
mean, no
good
offense to
point.
India. Yeah, it's
That's a
normal.
good point.
India, and rightly so, India has to look after its own interest. Nobody's
Mhm.
arguing against that. I am
Oh,
not
for sure.
arguing against it. But at the same time, when you start to think in terms of the last 14 years since Modi came to power, what has been achieved for India?
Mhm.
And I know some do not like me, especially from India, when I talk about this because it's the truth. But all I'm saying is putting out the facts on the ground. But
Yeah.
India could turn things around if they can come up with a strategy to deal with China, resolve the disputes over the borders. There are
Mhm.
always ways of fixing this kind of stuff. No,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and fix the infra. It didn't make sense to me back then when India decided to kick Huawei out for the
Mhm.
5G stuff. Why would you do that when you could improve in your telecommunication aspects? Because
Yeah.
any economy that develops starts with an infrastructure. If you don't have
Mhm.
infrastructure, you have nothing. So let's say thank you to Francis Tango. I want to say
Yes,
thank
I
you.
see it.
Thank you, Francis. And he
Um,
says, "Hi guys,
oh,
can
Jeffrey
you
Sachs.
maybe?"
I like Jeffrey Sachs. If you have people that you want us to interview, put it in the comments, but then also let them know, like send them
Yeah,
comments and say, hey, why don't you be on the Geopolitics and Conflict show with David and Elizabeth, so that they also can get that in their minds.
yeah,
So it makes it easier if you guys are asking for them to be on our show too. The more they
yeah.
know that we exist, the easier it is.
Yeah, and even with what's his name, John Mersheimer,
Mhm.
I'd be happy to talk to him as well, even though I do disagree with him on certain aspects regarding the Far East. So, but that's
Here's the thing. You and I,
yeah.
David, and you're phenomenal at this. It doesn't matter
Well,
if I disagree with somebody. I still want to hear what they have to say. I'm still interested in people's ideas and opinions.
yeah, yeah. Well, of course, it's because that's how we learn. Just
Mhm.
because you disagree with me, it doesn't I don't have to dislike you.
Yeah.
No, that doesn't. I don't operate that way.
No.
Heck, if you only know the comments that I read from some people,
Yeah.
I laugh because now I've reached a point where I've always knew this about life. Two things
Mhm.
that matter is the meaning of life and the emotions, how you react to things.
Yes.
And by
Yeah.
now I've learned that what you do, you just forgive. They don't know.
Absolutely.
They are
Absolutely.
not developed all the way, but
Yeah.
that's just how it works. So,
One of the things that I think has been the worst thing done to humanity
yeah,
is that the ability to think and reason has been taken out of the school systems. And it's not just in the United States, but around the world. People aren't taught to think. They're taught to learn what's in a book and just sort of regurgitate that information, because learning how to think your way through a problem is a skill.
yeah,
And right now, it's interesting, even during the years that shall not be named, um, they people who
oh
did
yeah.
their own research were ridiculed, right? They were told, "Oh, don't do your own research. Don't do your own research." Well,
Oh, I
then
know.
that's an even further push to stop people from thinking and making their own opinions up about something. Make up your own opinion, even if you're
Yeah,
wrong. That's still your own opinion. And then take in new information and be willing to change what you think based on new information.
yeah,
But that's how
yeah,
doctrine is allowed to flourish. Is if you can't think your way through something, then more or less you are at the mercy of somebody to tell you what life is. And I know that
yeah.
governments want
Now,
that, right? They want to control people that
yeah.
way.
Yeah. Now you know why I left academia, because I didn't
Oh,
want to just follow.
yeah.
I don't follow. It's because what I saw in the classrooms, and I was like, no, I ain't gonna work for me. It ain't gonna work for me.
Yep.
So and because to me it was like it become like cheating my own students. And how can I live with myself with that? I just couldn't, and I won't. I won't.
Mhm.
They thought I was bluffing when I said I will resign over this or just quit. I ain't gonna shortchange my students. There is no
Mhm.
way. And they thought I was like that. That idiot president was thinking, without naming names here, thinking that I'm gonna just bluff him. I was like, no, I don't bluff. So either it's gonna be this
You
or
do
we're
not
done.
bluff, David. You do
Yeah,
not
no,
bluff.
no. It's because of responsibility towards the students.
Yeah.
I couldn't, and I won't, no matter what. No matter what. So I end up leaving. So because our system is kind of, and that's a conversation for another day on a
Yeah.
different platform where we can talk.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's take a question or two, guys. And
Okay.
before I will sign off here,
Yeah, let me okay, Army with Harmony, I see you and I like this idea. So guys, I'm going to put in immediately after this, I'm going to put in the community a who would you like us to interview question, and then you guys put under there, and then the top names that I see, I'll do a poll. And
no,
you guys can like click on the poll, and like we'll see who you want us to interview the most. But I'll put a question first. And thank you, Army with Harmony, this is a fantastic suggestion. I will do that immediately after this live stream. Okay.
okay. I'll take the question from Army with Harmony, who has been an avid supporter, by the way. Thank you so much
Yes,
for
thank
your
you.
support. If you could advise Camilla, what will it be? For me, I'll tell her one word, two words: stop lying.
Mm.
That's it. Because I won't want to advise someone who's a liar. So that's just me. So
I
uh,
would advise her two things.
mm,
One, become human. Like, let people see you be real.
yeah,
Because one of the parts of her that doesn't work fundamentally, especially as she is campaigning, is
Yeah.
she tries really hard. Like she says like the same cliche phrases over and over again. She
Yeah.
tells stories that are like, I during the debate she said something about she understands small businesses because her mom's best friend was a small business owner growing up. Like nobody can relate to that. That's not a relatable story. So
Yeah.
be honest. And that is something that Trump does well. Like I think Trump is Trump is Trump is Trump. It does not matter what situation you get that guy in. That guy's the same guy. He may be crazy and a shit show, but he's the
Yeah.
same guy everywhere. And the other is that I personally, this is my personal opinion, I do not feel that Kamala Harris is qualified to be president of the United States. I don't think she understands foreign policy at all,
Yeah.
maybe at all. And I don't think that fundamentally she's qualified. So in that case, I would say find actual qualified advisors, people who do know these things, not Anthony Blinken, who, you know, more or less
No, it's not
is not well
qualified.
received around the world, but find real, actual advisors. So, should she become president, stack
Yeah.
your deck with people who are actually good at their job.
Yeah.
That is my advice.
Yeah, and that is part of our issue here because in the U.S. Across the West now, I've been convinced, and I've said this before. I've been convinced, the deficiency in leadership that exists across the West,
Mm-hmm.
across the West. So you'll be looking at it. Probably have to wait till the next generation. But between now and then, it will be very, very, very sad. So it's how it is. So.
Yeah.
All right, let's take one more question here from Hagwan. Dr. O, what is your opinion on how the Chinese government react to the typhoon versus how the American government react to the Hawaii fire? Very interesting. Two separate approaches, but also you have to understand the Hawaiian fire. The cause of it. There's a lot of stuff without getting into a lot of detail here. That is, I'm sure there will be censored there. I'll tell you this straightforward. If you only know the background of really what happened and who was behind it. So, but as far as the approach, yes, day and night. And to me that shows the responsibility of a government. People come first, citizens come first. And it pained me to see what was going on in Hawaii. And I've been in Hawaii before, and a wonderful
Beautiful
territory.
place.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And
Oh my
people there are attached to the land.
Which
Hawaii,
they should be. It's
yeah,
extraordinary.
yeah. Most Americans do not know Hawaii was never wanted to be part of the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just say it straightforward. So just the approach, yeah, to completely, because you got a government that is working for the people. Does that the government has its own issues? Whatever, of course, but overall, the priority of the citizens come first. That's the important aspects of it. You deal with the rest later on, whatever. For us here, it's kind of how can I score political points on a catastrophe like that?
Mm-hmm.
That's just the mindset of how politicians here operate, because politicians here are not being held accountable. And to me, if it were up to me to hold them accountable, you know what I will do. So,
Mm-hmm.
without stating that.
I think that I know, Hong Wong, you didn't ask me, but I'm going to answer anyway. I think fundamentally that the government, for whatever reason, wants Americans to know how unimportant we are, because that's what keeps happening. We had the chemical spill with the train. Remember, and Biden, nobody was talking about it. Nobody's helping those people. Hawaii happened. Nobody's helping those people. I mean, basically, they more or less. If you guys haven't done a deep dive into what happened in Hawaii,
Yeah.
it is so bad.
Yeah,
It's
take a look
so
at that.
corrupt. It's so bad. Please go take a look at it. But I feel like the U.S. government is somehow making sure that we know that we don't actually matter. And I don't know if that's a psyop. I don't know what that is, but there is no real conscious effort to get the American people on board with American policy anymore. I think there used to be a real need to like hide it in secrecy, and the US people have to be on board with whatever the foreign policy is, or completely hidden from the US population. But that's not the case anymore. I think they don't care what we think. I think they don't care what we think anymore. And I think they have enough power that it doesn't matter whether we feel taken care of by our government or not. I think they don't care about us. And I think they're letting us know that they don't care.
Indeed. All right, guys. Well, I hope you found this very informative, this conversation here. I know it's kind of happened before, but it is what it is. And we look forward to seeing you next time. As always, prepare yourself for a changing world order. Till next time. Bye-bye.